You probably know that taking up an engaging hobby like painting can be a great stress reliever, but have you tried doing it yet? Today on Still Time for Joy, we'll meet an award winning decoy artist who says spending time pursuing his passion is the perfect antidote to his stressful full time job as a police officer in New Jersey. Hello, I'm Sandra Levine, host of Still Time for Joy. My guest today is Tommy Lewis, whose nickname is Tommy Duck, a moniker he earned in childhood because he began carving decoys as a very young boy. Welcome to the show, Tommy.
Thanks, Sandy. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So I'm very excited to talk about your artwork and your job as a police officer and how the art relieves some of your stress. But before we get to all that, how did this all start? You were very young.
I started roughly around 6 years old. As a boy, wild imagination and filled with wonder and running around in the woods of my local neighborhoods. I started making canoes and totem poles and things like that, and fashioned a lot of my tools out of objects that I would find. Showing my age a little bit here, but if you remember the old pull tabs off of beer cans, I would take those and rub them on the curbs and things like that to kind of sharpen them, or find a piece of glass and use that more or less as a home fashion tool. And then my dad caught wind of what I was doing and saw it. He's like, "Where did you learn to do this?" And then I started explaining it, and then he's like, "Well, we're going to get you some proper tools because you're going to hurt yourself, the way you're doing it." And then eventually, he had asked me, he says, "Have you ever thought about making a bird?" And at that time, no, I hadn't. So he cut out a bird on the bandsaw, and I've kind of been making birds since.
And you just fell in love with it right away. So your dad was an inspiration for you, right? He also did woodworking. He was also a police officer. Tell me a little bit about how your dad inspired and encouraged you.
Well, my dad was a very skilled woodworker. He built boats and did a lot of colonial woodworking. We did a lot of work for churches, museums, and that kind of thing. And he was very encouraging. He always allowed me in the shop. Was always had free reign with the scrap pile. Accommodating when I wanted to do something, he would cut it out or allow me the tools and so forth.
You do several different kinds of art, waterfowl decoys and also nautical folk art. Let's start with the decoys. What do you love about creating duck decoys especially?
Well, the love really starts in nature. Growing up, I spent a lot of time around the Delaware River and birds and ducks and finding inspiration really in wild. And returning to that story of my dad, the very first thing he cut out was a duck. And then later I started pursuing hunting and things like that. And the Delaware River region is very well known historically for the Delaware River style decoys. And back then I didn't have money to buy decoys, so I started making my own, some of which I still have today. But it was kind of like walking in the path of legends. A lot of the historical carvers in the area, and I still carve a lot of ways and true to their tradition today.
So please walk me through the process. What is it like? What kind of wood do you use? I know you use a lot of vintage tools. Tell me the whole process.
It all starts in the cedar swamps of New Jersey. I only use cedar that's homegrown here in New Jersey. Most of the birds that were made from New Jersey and in New Jersey were from Atlantic white cedar, which grows in our cedar swamps down in the pine. So there are a few local sawmills that still cut it today. So we start out with a log and have it milled down into planks, and you take that plank and use a pattern which shapes it into a rough pattern of a decoy or a duck or shorebird or whatever it happens to be you're working on. You cut it out of a shape and then start whittling it down from there. There was a time I used machines. I started out with traditional tools and then advanced into using machines and doing more detailed work and highly ornate birds where you burn in each individual quill and feather and that sort of thing. But I never really was satisfied with that type of work, making an exact duplicate of a bird using calipers and strict measurements and that kind of thing. I lost my freedom of expression, which is the part I love the most. I want to make a bird how I want to make it and not really constricted to any kind of rules or regulations or anything like that. So I kind of stick or go towards more traditional kind of carving now, using traditional tools and that sort of thing. It's somewhat actually even therapeutic in a sense to hear it, which sounds kind of funny, but if you've ever heard a plane running through a board, just the steady rhythm of doing that becomes therapeutic and almost hypnotic in a sense. I've had people come over just so they can listen to the tools and me working.
And we're going to talk all about the therapeutic value of your decoy making. But besides using the vintage tools to get the duck into shape, don't you have to sand it and paint it? What else is involved in the process?
Oh yeah, for sure. Once you start, with a rough block, you use a hatchet, chopping off the big chunks and starting to shape it and round it, and then you work your way through a spoke shave or a draw knife, taking a little bit more off and keep removing wood until everything that's gone that doesn't look like a duck. So with spoke shave, you'll end up using rasps and things like that. And I tried today to go right from a draw knife because it just leaves a much smoother edge, so that there's very little sanding. I don't like using machines and I don't like sanding, so I try my best to get a smooth surface without having to do that. And then you'll prime it, paint it, which generally sits for a day or so that can dry. Sand it, paint it again. That sits and dries again. And then I only use artist oils, which is more traditional, but it's what I know. And it works for me, so I stick with it.
Now, I grew up along the Barnegat Bay, and for a time, my father was a duck hunter. He gave it up later in life, but we always had decoys hanging around the house, even long after the duck hunting was over. And I know there are different styles and people do different kinds of birds based upon where they are. And you're right by the Delaware River.
I live a stone's throw from the Delaware River, and that's where I got my start. And then I started hunting down in Barnegat Bay. So I got interested in that style of birds, and I still carve to both traditions today.
You've also entered your work in numerous competitions. You've gotten many, many ribbons and some best in shows. Talk to me about some of the awards you've won for your work.
When I started carving as a young person or young adult, I guess in my teenage years, I started taking some lessons with Vince Giannetto, and he really got me started in doing the decoy competitions. So I guess as roughly 13, 14 years old, I started doing competitions. So as you can imagine, the ribbons do pile up over the years. So I have boxes full of them. But I've taken several blue ribbons in various stages throughout. But most of my accolades are from Tuckerton, which is the local decoy show that's very close to my heart. And it's my hometown show, if you will. But I've taken 4 best in show there. Multiple for Barnegat Bay traditional, Barnegat Bay contemporary.
And you also create nautical folk art.
I wanted to expand my work. If you want to do it for a living, it's hard to do it strictly on decoys alone. And my heart and passion comes from being around water, and you get inspired by everything that's in the water, the fish, the whales, sharks, or whatever. So I started wanting to make those too, and expanded what I do.
Now, when you're not creating art, you work full time as a police officer, a corporal in Moorestown, which again is in the western part of the state, Burlington County, near the Delaware River. You graduated from the fire academy at age 16, so you've been working in one capacity or another as a first responder for more than 30 years, as an EMT, as a police officer. Please talk to me a little bit about what the stress is like for first responders, the stress of the job, because I think unless people have worked in that capacity themselves, it's probably hard for them to imagine.
And there's a lot of truth in that. It is hard for people to imagine, and a lot of times you'll hear people say, "Well, that's what you signed up for," but the reality of it is that you have no idea what you're signing up for until you start doing it. There's a few studies out there that have said that the average person has maybe 2 to 4 traumatic events in their life, And they say in a 25-year span for a first responder, it's upwards of 900. So it's a lot, and there's a lot to deal with, and we're really good at teaching people how to respond to emergencies, but not really good at how to take care of yourself after.
Yeah, sure.
And that's part of what leads me into my carving and that sort of thing, because you should find, if you can, a healthy outlet or release or something that takes you someplace else, helps you process, work through, or just relieve your mind of those events that you may have seen, or the stress, or whatever. Some people go to the gym, some people would read books, go for a walk or whatever. I happen to carve, and that's where I go.
I know traditionally a lot of first responders were very hesitant to talk about how the stress of the job affected them. They would hide it, internalize it. Is there more support today for first responders with mental health issues and dealing with the stress of the job, do you think?
It's getting better, I'll say that. And, we're always put in a position, I guess, to fix everyone else's problems, be the answer, be the solution, until it's you. Happily to say that, yes, today we are doing a better job at it, but I still think there's some growth potential there. I encourage all first responders to reach out to professionals, and not necessarily saying like you have a problem, but learn when you may, and start getting those tools and putting them in your toolbox for when you do. Because I can assure you, throughout your career, you're gonna see horrific things. You're gonna have to process the unimaginable, and get those tools beforehand, not after. I can't stress it enough how important it is, for people in my profession to look out for yourself mentally. So, yeah, I do encourage people to go to therapy and find ways of dealing before before it becomes a problem. And if you do have a problem, it's okay to have a problem. But what you do with it from there is that defining moment.
So, therapy is extremely important, as well as having some healthy hobbies. And that's where your artwork comes in and helps you tremendously. And I'm so glad for that. So, I want you to describe to me how you feel when you're making your art.
The best analogy I can use, and I often use it, is a book. Some days you struggle with the pages, and some days you fly through the pages, but almost always you get lost in the pages. So when I'm working on a piece, it takes you somewhere else, whether it's the day I spent on the river finding inspiration, remembering a specific bird, or how it captivated me, and wanting to translate that into a piece of art. It takes you somewhere else. That hypnotic noise of the tools, and in a lot of ways just erases whatever's going on in your mind. There are days I'll sit down at the bench and then not realize it, but 16 hours have passed and I forgot to eat breakfast, and you just get lost in it. And I'm grateful that I have that ability to do that.
So, when did you realize that creating art was more than just a pastime for you, that it could help you to stay grounded and process your feelings?
And I guess more lately, in my career, when you first start, you don't think or realize all the events or all the things that you see and do, and you just keep packing it away. Well, at some point in your life as a first responder, you're going to unpack that. So, what I encourage people to do is try to find healthy ways to do that. So for me, my carving is my healthy way to do that. And we can all think of different things or different avenues that people find escapes. And for me, my artwork is my escape. You have complete freedom to do whatever you want, wherever your imagination can take you. So I let it, and that's the path I go.
And what do your fellow officers think about your artwork?
A lot of them don't understand it. When I tell them, yeah, I'm going to retire and I'm going to be a carver, and they kind of look at you like you have three heads. Like, well, that's cute. It's a fun hobby, but yeah, no, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing this, and I'm really looking forward to having that freedom. Where I can just expand my artistic capabilities and what I'm doing and whatever inspires me at the moment. I can go out and make it. Looking forward to that next chapter in my life. But yeah, no, most people that I work with, they don't understand it. I've almost lived dual lives. Some people know me as Tommy Duck and others as Corporal Lois. But now, bringing those two worlds together.
And have you encouraged other people that you know to try art, for instance, to relieve stress, whether they're first responders or someone else? Have you shared what you've learned with others in any way?
Oh, sure. I often open my house to friends, or sometimes it's friends' kids or whatever who are interested in doing it. I do a lot of gatherings where I do demonstrations. Sometimes I do demonstrations in stores. Duluth Trading Company celebrates the makers kind of thing, and I'll do carving demonstrations there. Where people gather around. Sometimes they'll join in. They'll sit on my bench and hack away at whatever it is I'm working and get a feel for it. And I've started a lot of people throughout my career, even as young as I think 12 or 13. A very close friend of mine was inspired by what I was doing, and he's still carving today.
When you look at the artwork you've created, whether decoys or the nautical folk art, how does it make you feel to see what you've managed to bring to life?
I don't know that I've ever felt satisfied or like I was done the journey. And I don't know if I ever reach a point where I think I'm done the journey or growing, I might hang it up. But I'm still not where I want to be. I'm still trying to perfect it. I'm still trying to learn new techniques. So I'm a work in progress. I guess the best way to answer that.
Sounds like you're hard on yourself, Tommy. So, besides sometimes hunting ducks for food, I know you also told me that you go out in nature to just sit and observe them. What does it mean to you to be out in nature?
It's part of the process, really. Again, back to finding healthy ways of processing or escaping or working through stress. A lot of times I just like getting out there. I often say I get lost to go find myself, and I find inspiration in nature for the stuff that I make. Either photography or sketching, or sometimes you just sit there. The sounds of nature are therapeutic, and watching the birds and that sort of thing.
And I know preserving the wetlands and the habitat where the wildlife lives is a big part of what you're pushing for as well, right?
That's true. Yes, I often use my artwork as a catalyst to help raise funds for waterfowl conservation. Mostly through Ducks Unlimited, I've offered up I don't know how many species over the year for auction, and then Lehigh Ducks Unlimited picked me as Carver of the Year. And what that did is that course of the year, any person who donated, I think it was $2,000, would end up getting a decoy of mine as a thank you.
So you started your journey with encouragement and inspiration from your father, and now you have two children who also support your work. Your daughter helps with photographing wildlife for you. Your son helps with your technical needs. How do you feel about your children being involved in your work? Are they proud of you? What does it mean to you to have them helping you with your passion?
I love it. To me, it's just bringing it full circle and an extension to expand what I do to future generations. And my daughter she's more of a flat work artist. So she and I will actually paint together sometimes doing flat work. We'll just set up a studio in the living room, and she'll have her easel and I'll have mine. Music blasting, and we just get lost in a father-daughter moment in painting. And my son, he's more on the technical aspect where I struggle with technology and things like that. It's neat, and they both have their own interests, but it all centers back around back when my dad started it and continues with that.
Well, Tommy Lewis, thank you so much for sharing your artistic process with us today and talking about how beneficial pursuing a hobby can be. And thank you also for your long time work as a first responder.
Thank you, Sandy. It's been a pleasure.
If you need help dealing with the stress of the job, Cop to Cop offers confidential peer support to New Jersey law enforcement officers and their families. Call 1-866-267-2267 or visit njcop2cop.com. Search online to find additional mental health resources for first responders throughout the country. For Still Time for Joy, I'm Sandra Levine. If you found today's show helpful, please share the information with someone who needs it and follow Still Time for Joy for more practical tips on weathering life's storms, as well as inspiring stories of people who have turned their pain into purpose. Please consider supporting the work that goes into producing the show on Patreon. Follow Sandra Levine Productions on Facebook and YouTube, and learn more at sandralevine.com.